Welcome to the deep dive. And before we even jump in today, I just want to say, may your day and your entire week ahead be incredibly blessed.
Yes, absolutely. It's great to be here with you to dig into this.
It is. So today, our mission is to explore what is probably one of the most famous, most analyzed speeches in human history.
Oh, without a doubt.
Yeah, we're looking
Yep.
at Jesus' Sermon on the Mount right there in Matthew chapter 5.
Yep.
And we've got a massive stack of study notes from the Holman and NAA Study Bibles to help us out.
We really do. And the scope of what those sources give us is fantastic because we aren't just reading the text. We are looking at the historical context, the linguistic nuances of the original languages, and really the whole theological framework behind these ancient words.
Right, because you need all of that to really get it. Okay, let's unpack this by starting with the physical setting.
Which is so important.
It is. So Jesus goes up a mountain. The sources note this is likely Tabgha, near Capernaum. And then he sits down. And he wasn't just tired, right? Like in the first century context, sitting down was the authoritative teaching posture for a rabbi. It meant something official was starting.
What's fascinating here is the deliberate parallel to Moses. Any Jewish listener in that crowd would immediately catch the imagery.
Right, going up the mountain.
Exactly. Just as Moses delivered the law from Mount Sinai, Jesus is positioning himself as the new Moses, but he's delivering a completely new spiritual law. He's initiating a new spiritual exodus for his followers.
That is such a powerful image. And he opens this new law with the Beatitudes.
The famous blessed are statements.
Right, and they're just so wildly countercultural. I'd love for you to explain the original Greek word used there for blessed, because it kind of changes everything.
Yeah, the word is makarios, and, it often gets translated into English as blessed or sometimes happy, but in the New Testament, it doesn't mean having a good day. It fundamentally means being approved by God.
Ah,
It is a state of grace. It's an objective reality of divine favor, and it is definitely not a guarantee of uninterrupted material prosperity or circumstantial happiness.
which makes sense when you look at the specific types of people Jesus calls Makarios. I mean, it's surprising. He says, the poor in spirit, those who mourn, the meek.
Yeah, he completely flips the script on who gets divine approval. Take the poor in spirit. The sources point out this echoes Isaiah 61.
It's not about financial poverty.
No, not at all. It's about recognizing your absolute spiritual bankruptcy. It's knowing you are entirely dependent on God's grace.
And then the mourning, because that sounds like just being sad about a tragedy.
Right, but in this specific context, it's not just general sadness. It is a deep, profound grief over sin, both your own sin and the brokenness of the world. And that grief leads to genuine repentance.
Wow. And then there's the meek. I feel like we always equate meekness with weakness today.
We do, but that is a huge misconception. The meek are simply those who refuse to rely on physical force or manipulation to get their way. They submit to God's authority.
And the promise for them is that they will inherit the earth.
Exactly, which echoes Psalm 37.11. It's a reference to a future renewed earth. Their reward is massive. It's just not immediate earthly power.
I love looking at the linguistics of this next one. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness. The study Bibles point out that the resulting phrase, they shall be satisfied, is actually in the passive voice.
Yes, the divine passive.
Right, meaning this righteousness isn't something you achieve by just trying really hard. It's granted by God.
That is the crucial distinction. God provides it. And if you look at the broader picture of the Beatitudes, being merciful, pure in heart, being peacemakers, these traits are meant to reflect the very character of the Heavenly Father. You are mimicking God.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. After setting up this internal character, Jesus moves to the metaphors of salt and light. And the historical use of salt is key here.
Oh, absolutely. It wasn't just for making food taste better.
Exactly. Before refrigeration, salt was a vital, purifying agent. It preserved meat in a corrupt world. So disciples are supposed to be that preservative.
But Jesus gives a warning. If a disciple loses this distinct flavor, they become like insipid salt.
Useless salt.
Right. Back then, salt was gathered from places like the Dead Sea and had a lot of impurities. If the actual sodium chloride leached out, you were left with a white powder that looked like salt but did nothing. Jesus says that kind of salt is useless, thrown out, and trampled.
And the light of the world metaphor works the same way. A city on a hill cannot be hidden. Your genuine faith can't be concealed.
It has to be visible.
Yeah, it must result in good works.
Yeah.
But the point of those works is to glorify the Father, not yourself.
Precisely. And right after this, Jesus shifts to talking about the law, which is where a lot of misconceptions pop up. People thought he was there to abolish the Old Testament,
But he emphatically states he came to fulfill it.
to bring it to its intended ultimate meaning.
And the study Bibles highlight this hyper-specific detail he uses. He says not one jot or tittle will pass away.
I love this detail.
Me too. Break that down for us.
So a jot refers to the yod, which is the absolute smallest letter in the Hebrew alphabet. It basically looks like an apostrophe. And a tittle is just a tiny pen stroke that ancient scribes used to distinguish between two letters that looked almost identical.
So he's talking about the smallest possible marks on the page.
Exactly. Jesus is affirming the total unbreakable authority of the scriptures down to the literal smallest pen mark.
But this raises an important question, doesn't it?
This raises an important question indeed. Because right after affirming the law, Jesus says his followers' righteousness has to exceed that of the scribes and the Pharisees.
Which would have blown the minds of his audience. The Pharisees were the ultimate rule followers.
They were the gold standard of religious compliance. But the problem was they focused entirely on external behavior. Jesus is demanding a complete internal transformation of the heart.
And that perfectly sets up the 6 antitheses. The famous, "You have heard that it was said, but I say to you," statements.
He's raising the bar from external rules to internal purity.
Let's look at the first 3. The first is about anger. The law says don't murder, but Jesus says murder isn't just physical.
Right. He says if you call someone raka, which basically means empty-headed, or you fool, or if you harbor deep contemptuous anger, you are subject to the same divine judgment.
The internal anger is spiritually equivalent to the external act. And he prioritizes reconciliation so much that he gives this wild example.
Leaving your gift at the altar.
Right. You're mid-sacrifice at the temple, and you remember a conflict. Jesus says, stop everything. Leave the offering. Go make peace with your brother first.
God doesn't want your external religious performance if your internal relationships are full of venom.
Exactly. And the second antithesis is adultery. Same principle. It's not just the physical act. Entertaining lustful intent in the heart violates the covenant.
And this is where he uses some of the most shocking language in the sermon.
Yes, the hyperbole about gouging out a right eye or cutting off a right hand. I want to jump in and clarify this really quickly based on the notes because people read this and get terrified.
Oh, for sure.
He's obviously not calling for literal self-mutilation.
No, absolutely not. A blind person can still have a lustful heart. The eye isn't the root of the sin. It's a stark, unforgettable metaphor.
So what's the core takeaway there?
The takeaway is that you must be willing to take extreme, decisive action to remove sources of temptation from your life. It's about prioritizing your soul over your temporary comfort.
That makes total sense.
Yeah.
Okay, the third one is divorce. And the historical context here from the Holman and NAA Bibles is super helpful.
It's vital. The prevailing culture back then allowed for incredibly frivolous divorce. A man could dismiss his wife for almost anything.
Burning dinner, essentially.
Pretty much. And Jesus pushes back against that hard. He restricts divorce to cases of porneia, which means illicit sexual relations or infidelity.
And by doing that, he was fundamentally aiming to protect women, right? Because in that patriarchal society, a dismissed woman was just unjustly discarded.
She was left entirely vulnerable. Jesus is elevating the permanence of marriage and protecting the vulnerable at the same time.
Okay, moving into the final 3 antitheses, we start with oaths.
The loophole culture.
Yes. Explain this loophole culture of the first century.
So, people wanted to make promises sound official without actually using God's name. They thought if they didn't use God's name, they wouldn't be judged if they broke the promise.
Like crossing your fingers behind your back.
Exactly like that. They'd swear by the earth, or by Jerusalem, or even by their own head. Jesus completely dismantles this. He says God is sovereign over all of it anyway.
So just say yes or no.
Right. Let your yes be yes and your no be no. Anything else comes from the evil one. You shouldn't need a convoluted oath if you have a transformed character.
That leads right into the next one, which is huge. An eye for an eye. The lex talionis.
Such a misunderstood concept today.
It really is. The Old Testament rule wasn't a mandate for personal revenge, was it?
Not at all. It was a legal principle for judges. It was meant to ensure that the punishment didn't exceed the crime, to stop endless blood feuds, but people were using it to justify personal vengeance.
And Jesus forbids personal vengeance entirely. And the historical context of the examples he gives is just fascinating. Let's talk about turning the other cheek.
It's not just about accepting violence.
Right. A slap on the right cheek implies a backhanded slap from a right-handed person. That was a severe, calculated public insult.
It was an attack on your honor.
And Jesus says, don't retaliate. And then he talks about lawsuits. If someone sues you for your tunic, give them your cloak too.
And the cloak was your essential outer garment. You used it for warmth at night. Giving that up was a radical forfeiture of your rights.
But the craziest one to me is the extra mile.
The Roman occupation.
Yeah. Roman soldiers had the legal right to force any civilian to carry their heavy gear for 1 mile. It was deeply humiliating.
But Jesus says, don't just bitterly drag your feet for that one mandated mile. Voluntarily carry it a second mile out of radical love.
That is just stunning.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it leads perfectly into the final command of the section. Love your enemies.
The ultimate impossible command.
Exactly. And Jesus bases this on the character of God. God sends sunshine and rain on both the good and the evil. His grace is indiscriminate.
Even the tax collectors love their friends.
And tax collectors were despised as corrupt traitors. But even they can love people who are nice to them. True disciples have to reflect the indiscriminate, unconditional love of God.
So what does this all mean? When we look at all these notes and historical facts, it's clear this isn't just a heavy checklist of impossible rules.
No, it's not meant to crush us.
It's an invitation to a completely transformed heart. A heart that actually mimics the character of God from the inside out.
It really is the constitution of God's kingdom. And I want to leave you with a final provocative thought to chew on today.
I love these. Let's hear it.
If the Sermon on the Mount is really about this deep internal purity and reconciliation, how would our modern lives fundamentally change if we took it seriously? Think about our social media feeds or our workplaces. How would those spaces change if we actually prioritize leaving our gifts at the altar to go reconcile with people who have offended us?
Especially behind the anonymity of a screen.
Exactly. When no one else can see your internal contempt, Jesus' standard still applies.
That is a phenomenal question to sit with.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive. We really appreciate you spending your time with us to explore this incredible text. God blesses all the listeners.
We'll see you next time.